Leo heard the van before he saw the gun. It crawled past the biker bar with its lights off, engine growling low, like it was stalking something. The side door slid open, muzzle flashes strobed the parking lot, and 5 bullets tore through the night straight at a father, a mother, and a little kid in a too-big helmet. By the time anyone inside screamed, a homeless boy had already stepped into the line of fire. And what the Hells Angels did next made the whole city stop and stare. Welcome to Echo Tales family. If you're new here, welcome in. Go ahead and subscribe now, because this story isn't just something you'll watch, it's something you'll feel. To everyone who's been here from the very beginning, may God bless you and keep multiplying grace, protection, and favor over your life. Before we ride into this night, let's cover you and your loved ones in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for every person under the sound of this story. Wrap their families in your protection, heal what's broken in their bodies and hearts, provide where there is need, and flood their homes with a peace that makes no sense but comes straight from you. Let your presence sit with them as they listen. In Jesus' mighty name, Amen. Now lean in. Because this is the moment a boy with no bed, no safety, and no last name anyone bothered to remember saw a biker's family in the crosshairs of a black van, stepped into the path of 5 bullets, and forced an entire Hells Angels chapter to decide what kind of men they really were. Leo heard the van before he saw it. It wasn't the usual city rumble, not the lazy roll of cars drifting past the biker bar with music leaking from half-open windows. This was a low, hungry growl that made the bottles on the outdoor tables tremble and set something cold crawling up his spine. The black van slid along the curb with its lights dimmed, windows too dark, engine idling just a fraction too long in front of Max's Roadhouse, where laughter and rock music bled into the night. If you're already feeling this night tightening in your chest, quietly hit like, subscribe, and drop where you're watching from so more people see what quiet heroes look like. Leo kept his head down and his broom moving, pushing cigarette butts and crushed cans into a loose pile near the trash. The neon beer signs painted his torn hoodie in shifting colors, red, green, blue, making him look like he belonged to the lights instead of the street. His fingers were numb inside fingerless gloves, and the ache in his stomach had moved past hunger into that hollow float he'd learned to ignore. He told himself he was just here for whatever coins people dropped when they got too drunk to care where their hands landed. Behind him, the bikers laughed louder than the jukebox. Someone slapped a bar top, someone else cussed at a dartboard, and a little kid's giggle cut through it all, bright and clear. Leo glanced up just long enough to see her through the open door. A tiny figure in a too-big helmet, chin strap dangling, boots stomping out some clumsy dance while a big man with a leather vest tried not to smile too wide. The back of his cut spread across his shoulders, a white-winged skull, Hell's Angels curved like a warning and a promise. The van crawled by once, slow. Leo's shoulders tensed. Old habits. Back when he still had a case file and a last name that meant something to somebody, his stepfather's truck would do the same slow roll past the park, hunting. He'd learned that some engines didn't just move, they watched. The van came back a second time, slower. The driver's window cracked just enough to flick an ash, a red spark tumbling to the pavement. Leo's fingers tightened on the broom handle. He shifted closer to the line of bikes, letting their chrome bodies stand between him and the street. Each polished tank caught the neon and threw it back in broken streaks, distorted and sharp. Inside the bar, someone shouted over the music, "Riley, keep that helmet on." The little girl spun, wobbling, her visor slapping down and back up again. The big man, her father, obviously, reached out and steadying her with one hand while using the other to tuck her hair behind the strap. For one heartbeat, his face softened completely, every hard line smoothing out as he kissed the top of the helmet like it was made of glass. The van turned into the lot. Leo's chest went tight. He didn't think, he recognized a pattern. Vehicles didn't creep through biker parking lots at midnight with their lights half off unless somebody inside had already made a decision. The side door of the van quivered, just enough for the metal to catch the fluorescent glare from the gas station next door. The angle was wrong, the timing worse, everything inside him screaming that this wasn't a delivery, wasn't a drunk turning around, wasn't anything normal. He dropped the broom. The clatter vanished under the hum of engines and the muffled drum of bass from inside the bar. He could have turned away then. He could have stepped back into the shadow between the dumpster and the wall, folded himself into the kind of small that kept him alive under bridges and behind supermarkets. Nobody would have noticed. Nobody ever had when fists fell or doors slammed or caseworkers shrugged. When his stepfather had broken his arm against the kitchen counter, the only witness had been an overworked social worker's voicemail. The side door of the van slid open. Cold metal caught the light, and the night snapped. 5 muzzle flashes tore the parking lot into pieces. The first shot blew out the neon sign above the door, showering green glass like toxic rain. The second chewed into a row of bikes, chrome screaming as mirrors exploded and metal shrieked. Screams erupted, chairs scraped, someone tackled someone else inside. The third, fourth, and fifth bullets lined up with the doorway, where Riley stood, helmet crooked, eyes wide, frozen in the sudden hurricane of sound. Leo moved. He didn't sprint like a movie hero. His body lurched, every bone protesting, rubber soles slipping on oil-slick concrete. His mind emptied, burned clean by one thought that wasn't even words, just a direction, forward. The world narrowed to the tiny girl's outline and the black holes at the end of the gun. He hit her like a crash he'd been walking toward his whole life. His shoulder slammed into her chest, the breath whooshing out of her in a small, shocked grunt as he twisted mid-air, flipping their bodies so his back faced the van and she fell beneath him. The impact with the threshold drove the air from his lungs. For half a heartbeat, everything went silent, the way it did after his stepfather's worst punches, like the world took one long, cruel inhale before it screamed again. Then the bullets found him. The first hit low in his side, a hammer made of fire. The second punched into his back higher, somewhere near his shoulder blade, detonating white pain that made his vision spark. The third slammed into the same torn hoodie already soaked with the first two, and suddenly he couldn't tell where one wound ended and the next began. The fourth and fifth were different, he didn't feel them as separate hits, just a crushing weight that pinned him to the doorway, bones rattling, ears ringing. He tasted blood, sharp and metallic, coating his tongue like pennies held too long in a clenched fist. His hands scrabbled for purchase, fingers finding the edge of Riley's helmet and pushing it down over her face. The plastic scraped his knuckles, almost comforting in its cheap familiarity. "Don't move," he rasped, his voice barely a breath against her hair. "Stay small. Stay down." He'd given himself that same order 1,000 times. Tonight, he finally understood what it meant to say it for someone else. The van fishtailed, tires screaming as it jerked out of the lot. The last muzzle flash lit the world in harsh orange for a split second, then vanished into the dark. The engine roared, echoing off brick and glass, shrinking as the vehicle tore down the street and disappeared into the city that had never bothered to see Leo at all. Silence didn't come back gently. It crashed. Boots pounded. Voices overlapped in a jagged tangle, curses, prayers, someone yelling for an ambulance, somebody else shouting to lock the door. Glass crunched under heavy steps. Music still played faintly from the jukebox, wildly out of place, a love song bleeding into a scene that smelled like gunpowder and fear. Hands grabbed at his hoodie, trying to pull him off Riley. They slipped, came away red, and froze. What the? Don't touch him. The big man with the winged skull on his back appeared above Leo, dropping to his knees so hard the concrete scraped skin from his jeans. His eyes were wide and wild, his vest hanging open, patches smeared with glittering shards of neon glass. Riley crawled out from under Leo's arm on her elbows, helmet askew, cheeks streaked with tears and soot. He pushed me, Daddy, she sobbed. He took it. The biker looked down. Really looked. For a second, Leo saw what everyone else always saw, a dirty kid in a ruined hoodie, skin too pale, cheeks hollowed by weeks of skipped meals, eyes ringed in shadow. A nobody. A problem. A ghost. People stepped around like spilled beer. Then the man's gaze dropped to the spreading pool of blood, to the torn fabric, to the way Leo's body still curled protectively around his daughter even as it shook. Something in his face broke, all the barroom bravado and hardened edges melted into pure, naked terror. "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh, kid." His hands, big, calloused, ringed, pressed into Leo's side, trying to stem the flow. Pain exploded, hot and white, rocketing through Leo's ribs and into his skull. He bit down on a cry and tasted more blood, this time from his own tongue. "Stay with me," the man ordered, voice rough. "You hear me? You took our bullets." Leo's vision tunneled, edges darkening. Somewhere beyond the doorway, engines were starting, one after another, the sound building like a storm rolling in on the horizon. "That makes you ours." The words didn't make sense. Not at first. Ours was a word other kids got, the ones whose names were on birthday cakes and school rosters and doctor forms. Ours was something signed on custody lines Leo had watched adults ignore. He tried to answer, to tell the man he'd only stepped because nobody had ever stepped for him, and maybe this was the only way he knew how to exist. Nothing came out but a ragged wheeze. A leather vest he'd been staring at from the curb all night suddenly bunched under his head, someone sacrificing their precious cut to keep his skull off the bloody concrete. Riley's small hand caught his, fingers sticky and shaking, squeezing with the desperate strength only a terrified child could muster. Sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer, braiding with the rising growl of motorcycles until the night itself seemed to vibrate. Red and blue began to strobe against the bar's shattered front, painting the scene in colors Leo had only ever seen from the outside, watching ambulances race past the places he slept. His world shrank to three sensations: the crushing pressure on his wounds, the tiny hand holding his, and the thunder of engines lining up just beyond his fading vision. For the first time in his life, Leo wasn't sure if the sound of people coming for him meant danger, or the beginning of something else entirely. The ambulance felt smaller than the alley he used to sleep in. Leo stared up at the vibrating metal ceiling, every bump in the road sending a fresh shock of pain through his side and shoulder. Someone had cut his hoodie open, cold air licked at his bare skin while heat burned deep under the bandages. The siren wailed above them, but all he could hear clearly was the wet sound of the paramedic's gloves pressing into his wounds, and the way his own breaths came out in short, panicked gasps he couldn't control. The world outside was a blur of red and blue strobing through the rear windows. Inside, the light was harsher, white, unforgiving, turning his skin the same color as the sheet under him. A monitor beeped an uneven rhythm at his head, speeding up whenever the paramedic shifted pressure, slowing when Leo's vision tunneled and the edges went dark. His fingers twitched against the thin mattress, searching instinctively for something to hold on to. If stories like this grip you, hit like and subscribe so you never miss the next twist. He found it. Tiny fingers, wedged into his palm. Riley's hand. Someone had let her climb in just long enough to squeeze his before they loaded him up. They tried to pull her back, but her grip had locked like a clamp. Now her handprint felt burned into his skin, even though she was gone, left behind in the flashing chaos of the parking lot with her father and a sea of roaring engines. Pressure's barely holding, the older paramedic muttered, leaning over him. Sweat shone on his forehead despite the cold air. "We're losing it." "I'm trying," the younger one snapped from the head of the gurney, voice shaking slightly. "Kids half our size and carrying more lead than some body armor. Who just stands there and—" Eyes on his airway, the older cut in. "Talk later." Leo's gaze rolled sideways, fixing on the back doors. Through the narrow strip of glass he caught broken images, headlights stacked in tight formation, chrome glinting under streetlights, handlebars and helmets and patches. The sound of engines wasn't behind them anymore. It was everywhere, surrounding the ambulance like a moving wall. "They're still with us?" the younger paramedic asked, following his stare. "Every one of them," the older replied, a grim edge in his tone. "Whole damn club's riding escort. City's gonna have a heart attack when they hit downtown." Leo tried to speak, but his throat felt raw, like he'd swallowed sand and smoke. Words stuck somewhere behind his teeth. He'd never had anyone walk next to him on purpose, much less follow him. Most people only noticed him long enough to tell him to move along. Now an entire storm of steel and leather was pacing their every turn. For him. His chest tightened, not just from the bullets, but from something he didn't have a name for. "Hey," the older paramedic said suddenly, leaning close until his lined face filled Leo's view. "You still with me, kid?" Leo managed a tiny nod. It sent a sharp flare of pain shooting up his neck into his skull, but he held on to consciousness with stubborn fingers. "You did something tonight," the man said quietly, voice dropping under the siren. "Most grown men wouldn't. You hear me? You gave that little girl a chance to grow up." The words didn't fit inside Leo's head. They bounced around, colliding with memories of police reports that went nowhere, of social workers using phrases like, "out of our hands," of sleeping under overpasses while cars flew by overhead, headlights never slowing down. He blinked hard, tears burning tracks through the grime on his temples. Don't let them take her," he choked. "Nobody's taking her," the man answered. "Her old man's not the type to let go." He glanced toward the doors, where the glow of motorcycle headlights flashed in unison with each turn. Neither are his friends. The pain surged. It came in waves now, rolling up from his side, cresting in his chest, breaking behind his eyes. He clenched his jaw until it shook, trying not to scream, because screaming felt like something that would make him smaller, weaker, more like the scared kid his stepfather used to enjoy breaking. The monitor stuttered. Pressure dropping again, the younger paramedic said, panic creeping in. We're less than 2 minutes out, if we hit one more red light. We're not hitting a red, the older replied, eyes flicking up. Not tonight. Outside, through the glass, Leo saw why. The line of bikes had surged ahead, fanning out at the intersection. Engines roared as riders blocked cross-traffic, bodies and chrome forming a human barricade around the path of the ambulance. Cars that might have crept forward on instinct stopped dead, drivers staring wide-eyed as the Hells Angels turned a busy city street into a private corridor. For once, every light was theirs. The ambulance shot through, tires squealing as they swung around the last corner. Hospital floodlights exploded into view, washing everything in stark white. For a heartbeat, Leo thought he saw himself from above. A bleeding nobody on a gurney, carried forward by strangers, chased by a hurricane of noise and color. He wondered, absurdly, if anyone watching from the windows would think he mattered. Then the doors burst open. Cold night air slammed into him as the paramedics yanked the gurney out, boots hitting asphalt in a practice dance. Voices rose around them, gunshot victim, multiple entry wounds, teen male, critical, blending into a single frantic blur. He caught flashes. Automatic doors yawning wide, nurses in scrubs rushing toward him, a security guard stepping back instinctively when he saw the wall of bikers behind the ambulance. They rolled him through the entrance. The sudden brightness seared his eyes. The floor beneath him changed from rough asphalt to polished tile, the wheels of the gurney rattling over a metal threshold. A hand landed on the side rail, big and calloused, running to keep up. Leo turned his head and saw the biker from the bar. Riley's father, keeping pace, his vest half-zipped, face carved with lines that hadn't been there an hour ago. "I'm right here, kid," the man said, breathless. "You hear me? You're not doing this alone." Leo tried to answer. His lips moved, but no sound came. All he could see was the man's patch, winged skull, Hell's Angels, and the smear of drying blood across it where those big hands had pressed into his side. His blood. They hit a corner too fast. The gurney tipped, then righted. Pain flared like lightning. He tasted bile and copper. "Vitals are crashing," someone shouted. The hallway ceiling stretched out above him like a tunnel that might never end. Fluorescent lights flickered past in a staccato rhythm, each one marking another second his body had to decide whether to hold on or let go. Shadows leaned in at the edges of his vision. The shapes of other patients, nurses flattening themselves against walls, a janitor gripping his mop so tight his knuckles went white as the river of leather and denim swept through the sterile world. They burst through swinging doors into a bright, freezing room that smelled like antiseptic and metal. Hands multiplied, cutting away what remained of his clothes, taping tubes to his skin, lifting his arms, turning his head. All the places where he hurt blurred into a single, howling point somewhere behind his ribs. "Kid," someone said near his ear, the voice deeper, rougher. The biker. "You stay. You understand. You stay." Leo's eyes rolled toward him. For a second, the chaos thinned. He saw the man clearly, the gray threading his beard, the old scars along his jaw, the fear etched so deep into his expression it looked like it might never come out. "Why?" Leo whispered. The words scraped his throat like broken glass. The man blinked hard. "Because you stepped in front of hell for my family," he said. His voice cracked, the last word almost a whisper. "That makes you mine. That makes you ours." A mask descended over Leo's mouth and nose, the elastic strap snapping against his cheeks. Oxygen blasted in, harsh and cold. He wanted to argue, to say nobody kept him, not caseworkers, not foster homes, not blood. But the machine beside him screamed, line spiking and dropping like a city skyline, and whatever words he might have found drowned in the noise. "Take him," a doctor barked. "Now. Or 3, let's move." The gurney lurched forward again, doors flying open, the bright world narrowing even further. Leo thought he heard Riley's voice somewhere in the distance, high and shaking, calling his name. Or maybe he just wanted to. He grabbed at the sheets, fingers clawing for anchor in a life that had never given him one. If you're holding your breath for him too, hit like and subscribe so you're here when the next hit lands. The last thing he saw before the double doors slammed behind him was the waiting room they were wheeling him past, a space already filling with leather vests and patched jackets, bikers occupying every plastic chair like they owned the building. Nurses stood frozen behind the desk, phones halfway to their ears, watching a world they didn't understand invade theirs. Riley's helmet sat in her lap as she perched on a chair too big for her, chin trembling, eyes locked on Leo's drifting form. Her mother's arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close, both of them bathed in the harsh fluorescence that made everyone look a little more fragile. The gurney pivoted, cutting the image off. Then the doors to surgery swallowed him. The lights above the operating table seemed further away than the stars he used to count through the cracks in the overpass. Voices became muffled, distorted by the mask and the roaring in his ears. Someone said, 5 entry wounds, someone else answered, if he makes it, and those words clawed at the inside of his chest like they were trying to get out. He tried to lift his hand. It felt like lifting the whole city. One of the faces above him came into focus. Tired eyes, hair tucked into a cap, mask hiding everything but the set of his jaw. The surgeon. "You picked one hell of a family to save, kid," the man murmured. "Let's see if we can give them a reason to keep you." Cold washed through Leo's veins as the anesthesia hit, a tide pulling him away from the blinding lights and the crowded waiting room and the rumble of engines outside. For a heartbeat, he hung there, suspended between the life that had always hurt and the one that might be waiting if he somehow came back. Somewhere beyond the doors, hundreds of bikes idled, refusing to leave until someone told them whether the homeless boy who took 5 bullets for one of their own was going to live or die. Leo's eyes fluttered once. Then the world went completely black. And the knife made its first cut. Riley counted the cracks in the waiting room floor until the numbers stopped meaning anything. The cheap tiles were the color of old teeth, scuffed and stained, with thin black lines running between them like roads on a map that didn't lead anywhere she wanted to go. Her boots didn't quite reach the ground from the plastic chair, so they swung in tiny, restless arcs, tapping out a rhythm that didn't match the distant beep 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 of the machines behind the double doors. Her helmet sat in her lap, pink shell smeared with dirt and a faint brown streak where Leo's blood had brushed it. If you want to see how deep this story goes, like and subscribe before the next blow lands. Across from her, two nurses whispered behind the desk, not quietly enough. One kept glancing at the glass entrance where the Hells Angels had turned the hospital front into something between a parking lot and a barricade. Rows of bikes gleamed under the floodlights, chrome catching every flicker of police cars slipping past on the street. The rumble from the idling engine seeped through the walls, a low, constant growl, like the whole building was sitting on the chest of some enormous animal. Riley's dad couldn't sit. Grim paced a groove into the floor, boots thudding on the tile, his cut hanging open over a faded black t-shirt. Dried flecks of red still marked the leather where his hands had pressed into Leo's side. Every few laps he passed the window to the surgical corridor, eyes raking the closed doors like he could force them to open by will alone. Men in matching vests filled every spare chair, patches and tattoos a violent contrast to the pastel fish and cartoon bears painted on the pediatric wing walls. A little boy with a cast on his leg stared openly at them, clutching a stuffed giraffe. His mother murmured something about gangs and dangerous, trying to tug his gaze away. The boy didn't move his eyes. "What are they doing here?" the mother whispered. Riley heard one of the older nurses answer under her breath. "Guarding somebody. That homeless kid, I think. The one from the news alert." The words made Riley's fingers tighten around her helmet. "He's not homeless," she muttered, too quiet for the grown UPS to catch. "He's Leo." Her mother sat beside her, one arm banded around Riley's shoulders. The hand on Riley's upper arm trembled, even though her voice stayed soft, and even every time she said, "He's going to make it. You hear me? He's strong." Riley had never seen her dad look afraid. She'd seen him angry, road rage at drivers who cut too close, jaw clenched when he talked about court dates and old charges, the cold fury that rolled off him when stories came up about people hurting kids. She'd seen him happy in his rough way, singing off-key to old rock songs, laughing with his brothers at the bar, eyes crinkling at the corners when she wrestled his helmet onto her head. But afraid? That was new. It sat on him like a wet jacket, heavy and clinging. He stopped pacing only when the doors swung open and a detective in a rumpled suit stepped out, flanked by a uniformed officer. They both paused at the sight of the waiting room, taking in the wall of leather and denim, the tattoos, the way every patched vest turned toward them in unison. The detective swallowed once, then walked up to Grim like a man approaching a cage he'd just realized was unlocked. "Mr. Grim, right?" he asked. Grim's eyes were flat. "That's what they call me. I'm Detective Harris. We need a quick statement on what happened at Max's Roadhouse." He glanced toward Riley, then back. "And we need to talk about the boy's status." "His status is he's in there fighting for his life," Grim said. "That's all the status that matters tonight." Harris shifted, clearly unused to anyone telling him what mattered in his own badge's territory. "We'll need his full name, any known relatives, prior addresses. If he survives, he's a key witness. If he doesn't, we still need to notify." He told the EMTs his name, Grim cut in. "Leo. No last name. Said the rest doesn't belong to him anymore." Riley's mother squeezed her shoulder. Harris sighed. "Look, I'm not your enemy here. But whoever was in that van didn't spray bullets at random. They aimed at the door. They saw your colors. They'll know a whole chapter watched their faces. With that many bikes outside, this hospital is a target until that kid can talk or he can't, Grim finished quietly. Silence rolled over the room. Even the engines outside seemed to momentarily ease, as if the whole building was inhaling at once. Grim stepped closer, the winged skull on his back catching the fluorescent light. "You want to protect this hospital?" he asked. "Good. So do we. Nobody here gets hurt because of what I wear or what my people ride." He jerked his chin toward the doors. "But let me make one thing clear, officer. You touched that kid without me, without her," he nodded at Riley's mom. "You'll have a different kind of problem." Harris looked at him for a long beat, measuring. Then he nodded once. "Fine. We coordinate." He lowered his voice. "But we got word from patrol, your shooters. They didn't just vanish. A black van was seen circling 2 blocks from here before we locked the streets down." Riley's stomach dropped, as if the floor had suddenly tilted. "They're coming here," she whispered. Her mother's arm pulled her closer. "They won't get in," she said, but the words sounded like she was saying them as much for herself as for Riley. Outside, thunder rolled. One by one, more bikes were arriving, their headlights spearing the night as they turned into the hospital lot and slotted into formation. Chapters from neighboring towns, guys Riley had only seen at big runs or barbecues, were suddenly here, filing in with solemn faces. Somewhere in the distance, somebody's phone vibrated. A picture coming through of the growing crowd, captioned with something like, "Angels at County General." Anyone know why? By morning, the whole city would. Time folded strangely. Minutes stretched, elastic and weird, then snapped. A nurse came out twice with small updates. "He's still in surgery, they're doing everything they can." Both times, Grim stepped forward like he might storm the operating room himself if she said anything different. Both times, she retreated under the weight of 100 eyes that weren't used to begging for anything. At some point, coffee appeared, cooling in paper cups untouched on the table. Someone draped a blanket over Riley's shoulders. She didn't remember when. She only realized it was there when her fingers started picking at a fraying corner in steady, nervous circles. A biker she didn't know, older, with silver in his braid and a patch that said Nomad, knelt in front of her once. "Kiddo," he said gently, tapping the helmet in her lap. "You hanging in?" She nodded, because she didn't trust her voice. "You remember this," he said. "Whatever happens tonight, you remember, he stepped in front of you because he decided you were worth it. That's not a debt this club takes lightly." The doors to surgery stayed shut. Midnight bled into something past it. The hospital quieted in the way only buildings dedicated to emergencies ever do, less noise, same fear. The televisions on the wall cycled through late-night shows, commercials, then local news. At first, no one paid attention. Then a familiar image flickered across the screen, phone footage of the hospital parking lot, the caption screaming, "Biker gang blocks ER, what are they hiding?" Riley watched as a shaky zoom caught the line of Harleys, the Angels standing shoulder to shoulder at the entrance. None of the reporters had gotten inside, not past the officers and the men in leather. The voiceover was slick, borderline accusatory. "They make it sound like we're the bad ones," she whispered. Grim snorted, not looking away from the doors. "They always do till they need us." "But we saved someone," she said. Leo saved me. Grim's shoulders tightened. For a moment, all the layers he wore, the patches, the reputation, the years of leading men into fights and funerals, seemed to fall away. He turned just enough for Riley to see his face, lined and tired in the harsh light. "Yeah," he said quietly. He did. The swing doors at the end of the hall finally opened. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Paper cups stilled. The TV might as well have cut to static. A man in blue scrubs stepped out, cap pushed back, mask hanging loose around his neck. There was a streak of something dark across his sleeve, and his eyes looked like they hadn't closed in a very long time. "Family for Leo," he called. The word hit like a thrown brick. Family. Grim was moving before anyone else could process it. He crossed the distance in long strides, the room rising around him like a single body. Vests scraped chairs. Boots shuffled. The Hell's Angels closed in behind him, forming a rough half-circle that swallowed the space between the waiting room and the doctor hole. "We're here," Grim said. The surgeon took them all in, the patches, the ink, the hard faces, and the little girl clutching a pink helmet like a shield. For a heartbeat, something cautious flickered in his expression. Then it softened. "He made it through surgery," the doctor said. "It was difficult. 5 entry wounds. Significant blood loss. One bullet shattered a rib, another missed his spine by less than a centimeter. If any of them had been an inch to the left or right, we'd be having a very different conversation." Riley didn't realize she'd stopped breathing until her lungs burned. "But he's alive?" Grim asked, voice barely more than a gravel scrape. "For now," the doctor answered. "The next 48 hours are critical. Infection, swelling, organ failure, there's a lot that can still go wrong. But the fact that he's still fighting after what he took," he shook his head in quiet disbelief. "He's a tough kid." A sound rippled through the room, half exhale, half choked laugh. One of the bikers muttered something that might have been a prayer. Riley felt her knees go weak, relief crashing into her so hard it almost knocked the breath right back out of her chest. If you're still here holding on for this kid, hit like and subscribe so you're there the moment his story turns. "Can we see him?" Riley blurted. The doctor glanced at her, then at Grim. "One at a time," he said. "Immediate, family only, for now. ICU rules." Grim hesitated for the first time that night. "He doesn't have paperwork," he said. "No legal guardians, no parents that didn't lose the right to be called that a long time ago." He straightened, meeting the surgeon's gaze dead on. "But he took bullets meant for my daughter. That makes him mine in every way that matters." Something like resolve settled over the doctor's features. "Then tonight," he said, "that's good enough for me." He gestured down the hall. "You, and her," he added, nodding to Riley. 5 minutes. Don't touch the tubes or monitors. Don't move him. He's sedated, but sometimes they know who's there." Riley slid off the chair before anyone could tell her to wait. Her legs felt rubbery, like they belonged to someone else, but they carried her forward beside her father as they followed the doctor toward the ICU. The hallway back here was quieter, the lights dimmer, the air thicker with the smell of disinfectant and something metallic underneath. Doors lined the corridor, each with tiny windows showing fragments of people in various stages of broken. The doctor stopped at one near the end. Inside, a single monitor cast green light across a narrow bed. Riley's heart climbed into her throat. From the doorway, she saw Leo. He looked smaller without his hoodie, swallowed by white sheets and wires. Bandages wrapped his chest and side, stained in places where the bleeding hadn't fully stopped. A tube ran into his nose. Another snaked from his arm to a bag hanging overhead. His skin was the color of paper left in the sun too long. For a second, Riley couldn't move. The boy who had crashed into her like a human shield at the bar, who'd felt solid and fierce and impossibly big in that moment, looked fragile enough now that a strong breeze might carry him away. "Go on," Grimm murmured. "He didn't do all that so you could stand in the hallway." She forced her feet forward until she was beside the bed. Up close, she could see tiny freckles on his nose under the grime they hadn't finished washing away, the faint shadow of a bruise along his jaw from where he'd hit the doorway. His lashes lay dark against his cheeks, still and unmoving. "Hey," she whispered. Her voice barely stirred the air. The monitor kept up its slow, stubborn beep, as if counting the seconds since he'd decided she was worth 5 bullets. "It's me," she said. "Riley. The one who almost got you killed." Grimm made a soft sound behind her, but didn't correct her out loud. "You didn't have to do that," she went on. "You didn't even know my name." Leo's fingers lay limp on the sheet, palm half open. Without thinking, she slid her smaller hand into his, careful of the tape and the 4. His skin was cool, but there was warmth underneath, deep down, like embers under ash. "Dad says family is who stands in front of you when everything goes bad," she said. "So. I guess that means you're stuck with us now." For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then, just for a second, Leo's thumb twitched against her palm. It could have been a muscle spasm. A reflex. A dream he was trapped in. But Riley's breath caught, and the monitor line jerked, a tiny blip, a spike like a ripple in calm water. She looked up at her father, eyes wide. Grimm stared at their joined hands, his jaw flexing. The man who had stared down rival crews and cops now looked like he was standing on the edge of a cliff with no idea what lay below. Outside, beyond the ICU walls, the engines of hundreds of bikes revved in unison, as if the entire club felt that small movement at once. And somewhere in the city, in a dark room with a TV tuned to the same news report, the man who sat in the passenger seat of that black van watched shaky footage of the hospital gatekeepers, his fingers drumming on the arm of his chair. "He lived," the man said slowly, a smile that never reached his eyes curving his mouth. "Kid took all that and didn't die." He leaned forward, the light from the screen carving hollows into his face. "Then we finish it at the hospital." Leo's first thought when he woke up was that the world had gotten louder. The second was that breathing hurt less than it used to. The pain was still there, a deep, bruised ache in his side and shoulder, but it no longer felt like fire chewing through his ribs. Instead, it was a heavy, insistent throb, like his body was reminding him it still existed. The ceiling above him wasn't concrete or the underside of a bridge. It was a clean, white tile grid, broken only by the slow sweep of a ceiling vent. Light filtered in gentle and gray from a window to his right. If stories like this have you hooked already, like and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. He blinked, forcing his eyes to focus. The room smelled like antiseptic and plastics, layered over something warm and familiar, leather. A vest hung over the back of the nearby chair, its winged skull patch half visible in the pale light. The front of it was stained brown where blood had dried days ago. His blood. Hey. The voice was rough around the edges, like gravel washed by rain. Leo turned his head carefully. Grim sat in a chair, elbows on his knees, big hands steepled in front of his mouth. He looked different out of the chaos, more tired, more human, but there was still that dangerous weight in the way he held himself. His eyes, though, when they met Leo's, softened in a way Leo didn't know what to do with. "You picked one dramatic way to introduce yourself, kid," Grim said. Leo tried to answer and coughed instead. His throat felt like it had been sandpapered. Grim was on his feet in a second, reaching for the cup on the tray. He adjusted the bed with a button, raising Leo a little, then held the straw to his lips with a carefulness that didn't match the skull on his chest. Water hit Leo's tongue, cold and miraculous. He took small sips, every swallow sending tiny ripples of pain through his chest, but he welcomed them. Pain meant he hadn't disappeared. Not yet. How long? Leo croaked when he could speak. 3 days, Grim said. You've been in and out. Mostly out. He sat back down, but his body stayed leaning forward, like he was ready to spring up again at the slightest sign Leo needed something. Doc said if you made it to the 3rd sunrise, your odds went way up. 3 mornings. 3 whole mornings where someone had checked if he was still breathing. That alone felt like another world. I didn't, Leo's voice broke. I didn't mean to cause trouble. Grim huffed out something like a laugh. Trouble was already there, kid. You just stepped between it and my family. The memory hit him in fragments, neon shattering, the van door sliding open, Riley's helmet, the impact, the heat. He shivered. The monitor beside him responded with a jittery uptick. Grim's gaze flicked to it, then back. She's okay? Leo asked. The words came out sharper than he meant, knife-edged with panic. She's fine, Grim said immediately. Not a scratch. She's been drawing on your walls for days. Nurses had to make a rule. Leo let out a shaky breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Relief washed through him, so intense it made his eyes sting. The door creaked open. Riley slipped inside, helmet under one arm, her other hand wrapped in her mother's. She stopped just inside the threshold, eyes going huge. You're real, she whispered, like she'd half convinced herself he was something adults invented to make her feel safe. Last I checked, Leo rasped. She crept closer, each step hesitant, like she was afraid he might vanish if she moved too fast. Up close, he could see she'd colored on the helmet since he last saw it, tiny wings on the sides, little flames by the visor. Her gaze flicked over the tubes and bandages, the bruises, the way his skin sagged a little on his bones. You hurt, she said softly. Yeah, he answered. But you don't. So I'm calling it a good deal. Riley's mother, tired eyes, lines of worry etched into her face, stood at the foot of the bed, fingers twisted together. You don't know us, she said. You didn't owe us anything. You could have run. Leo thought of all the times he had. From shouting, from fists, from the heavy tread of boots coming down an alley. Running had been his survival skill, his whole toolbox. "I did run," he said quietly. "Just, toward, instead of away this time." Silence settled in after that, heavy but not uncomfortable. The monitor beeped, the heating unit hummed, distant announcements crackled over the intercom. Outside the window, he could just make out the tops of bikes lined up like patient animals, chrome catching the gray daylight. Grim cleared his throat, the sound too sharp in the small room. "We talked to some people while you were out," he said. "Cops. Social services. About your situation." Leo's stomach knotted. The word situation felt like a file being pulled from a cabinet. "I don't." "You're not going back under a bridge," Riley's mom cut in gently. "And you're not going back to anyone who laid a hand on you. Not on our watch." He opened his mouth, shut it. For once, he had nothing to say. Grim reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and folded. He set it carefully on the blanket by Leo's good hand. The fabric was a circle of white, thread thick and deliberate. A tiny winged skull. One word stitched underneath in red. Prospect. Leo stared at it. His fingers trembled when he reached out, brushing the patch. It felt more solid than it looked, like it weighed more than just cloth and thread. "Doc says you'll walk out of here," Grim said. "Might take time, might take pain, but you will. When you do, you're not walking back to the street. You're coming with us. Room. Bed. Food. People who'll notice if you don't show up for breakfast." "Why?" Leo whispered. The question scraped out of him, raw. "I'm nobody." Grim shook his head, slow and certain. "Not to us," he said. "You stood up when everyone else froze. You gave my kid a shield this world never gave you. You bled for my family. You don't earn your place now. You already paid for it." Riley stepped closer and laid her helmet on the bed near the patch. "Dad says family isn't just who you share a last name with," she said carefully. "It's who stands in front of you when everything goes bad." Leo felt heat burn behind his eyes. He blinked hard, but tears slipped free anyway, tracking into his hair. No one looked away. No one told him to stop. Riley's mom reached forward and took his fingers, squeezing gently. "If you believe kids like this deserve a family that shows up, quietly hit like and subscribe so these stories don't stay invisible." Outside, beyond the glass, the sky slowly lightened from gray to a softer silver. Nurses came and went, checking lines and monitors, their eyes flicking from Leo to the patch and back. Word had traveled, about the shooting, about the escort, about the way the Hells Angels had turned the hospital into a fortress for a boy with no last name anyone knew. Later, paperwork appeared. The social worker who walked in carried a folder and a tired expression. She started with the usual questions: name, age, where he'd been staying. Leo's answers were short, uneven. Under the table, Grim's hand rested on his shoulder, a weight that felt strangely solid, like a brace. "We have shelters," the social worker began. "Programs. Intake processes." "Not interested," Grim said. "We're filing for guardianship. Emergency at first. Longer, if he wants it." The woman hesitated. "You're a motorcycle club." "We're a family," Riley's mom said. He saved our daughter. We're not letting him disappear into a system that already forgot him once. There was a long pause. In the hallway, the rumble of engines pressed faintly through the walls, like distant thunder reminding everyone what waited outside. The social worker glanced toward the window, then back at Leo, who was watching her with a strange mixture of hope and flinch. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "Then let's do this properly." Forms were signed. Copies were made. Dates were stamped. Leo watched his name being written down next to Grimm's in ink that looked too dark to ever fully fade. For the first time, the lines on a page didn't feel like a trap. They felt like a door being held open. The day they said he could leave, the sky had just finished raining. Water clung to the edges of the hospital windows, turning the world outside into streaks and smears of color. Leo swung his legs over the side of the bed with slow, careful movements, each shift tugging at the healing wounds. A nurse helped him into a clean t-shirt, another wrapped fresh bandages around his torso. His breath hitched a few times, but he stayed upright. Grimm held out the vest. It wasn't fully patched. No big back rocker yet. But the small prospect tab and the winged skull over the heart stared up at him like a promise. Leo slid his arms in, fighting the pull in his shoulder. The leather settled around him, a little loose, smelling like road and smoke and something he still didn't have a word for. Belonging, maybe. "You ready?" Grimm asked. "Not even a little," Leo said honestly. "But, yeah." They moved slowly down the hallway, Leo, Grimm just to his side, Riley and her mother a step behind. Nurses peeked from behind counters, staff pausing with clipboards in hand, patients leaning in doorways as the boy who'd arrived in a storm of blood and noise made his way toward the exit on his own feet. Every few steps, Leo had to stop, hand braced on the wall, breath coming harder. Nobody rushed him. At the end of the corridor, the automatic doors stood waiting. Beyond them, he could see only brightness. If you've walked this whole road with him, like and subscribe so you're there when the next Forgotten Kids story starts. The doors slid open. Sound hit first. Not the sterile beeps and shuffles of the hospital, but a rolling wave of engines roaring to life. The parking lot was full, row after row of motorcycles lined up with military precision, chrome gleaming under the washed clean sky. Men and women in cuts stood beside their bikes, heads turning as one when Leo stepped onto the ramp. For a heartbeat, everything held still. Then the engines revved in unison, a thunder that shook the air. Riley ran the last few steps, careful not to jostle his side, and wrapped her arms gently around his waist. He felt her shaking, but it wasn't fear this time. Her mother followed, hugging him with the cautious firmness of someone afraid to break what she was holding. Grimm's hand settled on his shoulder, heavy and warm. "This is for you," Grimm said, nodding toward the bikes. Word got around. Some of these people rode 3 hours to be here. Leo's throat closed up. He'd spent years trying not to be seen, praying to be overlooked, teaching himself to slip through crowds like smoke. Now, he stood under a sky full of noise and eyes, and for the first time, being seen didn't feel like danger. It felt like armor he hadn't known he needed. They helped him onto the back of Grimm's Harley, every movement measured and careful. The seat felt huge beneath him, the world suddenly higher and wider than it had been on foot. Riley and her mom climbed into a truck behind them. Engines roared, falling into formation like a living river of steel. As they rolled out of the hospital lot, people on the sidewalk stopped and stared. Phones rose, capturing video of a homeless kid in a too-big vest riding at the heart of a storm of engines, leaving the ER not as a victim on a stretcher but as someone claimed. Wind slipped under the edges of his bandages, tugged at his hair, carried the faint smell of rain and gasoline. Every bump sent a sharp reminder through his ribs, but beneath the pain was something solid. The knowledge that if anything hit him again, he wouldn't be the only one bracing for impact. They turned onto the main road. The line of bikes stretched in both mirrors, a moving wall that said, without words, that this boy was no longer target practice for anyone. Riley leaned out the truck window just enough for her voice to carry. "Welcome home." The word wrapped around Leo tighter than the vest. Home. Not a doorway. Not a bench. Not an underpass. A place at a table. A room where someone would notice if he didn't come back. A family that had decided his life was worth fighting for, worth bleeding for, if it came to that. Behind them, somewhere in the city, the man from the van watched a grainy clip of the escort on his phone and felt something like frustration curdle into fear. He'd wanted the kid gone, a loose end tied off in red. Instead, he saw a boy carried by a small army that didn't know how to back down. He killed the video. But the engines kept echoing in his memory. Out on the road, Leo leaned his forehead lightly against Grimm's back, closing his eyes for a moment. The vibrations from the bike climbed up through his ribs, settling into his bones. For the first time he could remember, his story didn't feel like a series of escapes and endings. It felt like the beginning of something bigger, louder than the van's gunfire, brighter than the neon that had once shattered over his head. And as the Hells Angels carried him toward a future with his name on the door, the city that had almost watched him die realized something it wouldn't forget. When a homeless boy took 5 bullets for a biker's family, he didn't just survive. He changed who they were willing to be for every forgotten kid who came after him.